This is how Singapore was back in 1965. People were poor, crime was high, and education was a luxury, much like Iraq, Syria, or Somalia. But within just 25 years, everything changed dramatically. Singapore turned into one of the most developed countries globally. Nowadays, it's known for being super rich, super clean, and having a very low crime rate. What an incredible before-after transformation. But how did this country go from this to this in just 3 decades? What's the secret we totally missed out on? Let's find out the answers to these questions. Singapore is such a small country in Southeast Asia that you might miss it on a map. It's separated from Malaysia by a body of water called the Strait of Johor. Singapore is only 710 square kilometres big, with around 5.7 million people. This means there are about 8,028 people for every square kilometre, which is a lot. In fact, Singapore is 18 times more crowded than India and is the 3rd most crowded country in the world, after Monaco and Macau. The name Singapore comes from 2 Sanskrit words, Singapura, which means the Lion City. It's one of the Asian tigers, a group of countries like South Korea, Hong Kong and Taiwan that are known for being very developed. Even though these places have a lot of people living close together, they also have much higher GDP per capita compared to other parts of Asia. Singapore is also home to many different kinds of people who get along well. They practice religions like Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, Hinduism, and Taoism, with smaller groups like Jewish, Zoroastrian, Jain, and Sikh communities. People in Singapore come from various ethnic backgrounds, with Chinese being the largest group at 74.5%, followed by Malays at 13.5%, Indians at 9%, and other groups making up 3%, including Eurasians, Arabs, and the indigenous Orang Laut tribes. Despite these differences, Singapore believes in unity in diversity, which means they value everyone being together despite their backgrounds. But Singapore was not like this before. Long ago, it was a busy place where people from different cultures came to trade things like spices, fabrics, and more. They came from places like Malaysia, Thailand, India, Arabia, Japan, and China. Different groups of people, like rulers from Indonesia, the Portuguese, and the Dutch, controlled Singapore at different times. The British took over in 1819, led by Thomas Raffles, and turned it into a place where ships from all over the world could come and trade freely. Singapore also became famous for processing rubber because it was close to Malaysia, where rubber trees grew well. Plus, the opium, which the British used to farm in India, was brought to Singapore for processing. Many Chinese workers got addicted to opium, which caused lots of crime. During World War II, Singapore was taken over by the Japanese in 1942. Under their rule, the city suffered a lot. After the war, the British returned to Singapore and worked hard to fix problems like food shortages and diseases. Many Singaporeans liked them because they helped defeat the Japanese and treated their colonies better. This led Singapore to eventually govern itself. Elections started in 1948, a constitution was made, and in 1959, Lee Kuan Yew became the first Prime Minister. He initially wanted Singapore to join Malaysia, but the Malaysian government didn't like the People's Action Party and didn't want them in their elections. This made the situation tense. Singapore finally separated from Malaysia in 1965 because they couldn't agree on important things like money, treating people fairly, and getting along with different groups of people. The British helped Singapore stay safe, but they left in 1971. This was tough for Singapore's defence and money. Lee Kuan Yew worked hard to manage these issues. He also saw other big problems like unemployment, drug problems, and not having enough natural resources. Lee Kuan Yew did a lot to make sure Singapore was safe and friendly with other countries. He started a group called ASEAN in 1967 with 5 other countries to work together and made it compulsory for young people to join the defence forces to keep Singapore safe. He knew education was crucial for progress. So, in Singapore, he made it compulsory for kids to go to school and focused on giving a good education to everyone. They also made sure people could learn skills that helped the country grow. Singapore's vision of a multiracial, secular nation promotes equality, transcending religious and cultural divides. Lee Kuan Yew's policies, like the Ethnic Integration Policy or EIP, the Maintenance of Religious Harmony Act, and Racial Harmony Day, fostered communal harmony. In EIP, he made a rule for government housing where people from different ethnic groups must live together in certain percentages, like 22% Malays, 84% Chinese, and 10% Indians. This stops people from separating into their ethnic areas like Hindu areas or Muslim areas. It helps everyone live together peacefully and get to know each other better. He also prioritised cleanliness, launching the Keep Singapore Clean campaign in 1968, with measures like waste collector licensing, recycling bins, public toilets, and strict fines for littering and smoking. Singapore helped solve the problem of slums by moving more than 26,000 families to tall public housing buildings and giving them things like water, electricity, and gas. This made things much better, with about 80% of Singaporeans now living in homes provided by the government. Because of this, there are very few homeless people, with only 530 people seen sleeping on the streets last year. They also worked on making the city cleaner and nicer by organising street vendors into designated areas. They moved about 4,900 food sellers to special food centres and built new markets for vegetable sellers. They also cleaned up rivers by getting rid of pig and duck farms and moved over 2,800 factories. Most importantly, Singapore also made sure healthcare was affordable for everyone. They expanded government hospitals and created new healthcare plans like MediSafe, MediShield, and MediFund. Due to the lack of space in Singapore, they don't encourage people to own cars by charging high taxes and limiting permits. Instead, they have good and cheap public transportation like buses and trains. The government helps with important things like education, healthcare, transport, and housing to make sure people can afford them. But all these things lead to one crucial question: how did the government manage to do all these things? Because unlike some European countries where taxes can be really high, in Singapore, tax rates are quite low, ranging from 2% to 24%. Then, how did the government of Singapore get so much money to run everything? Well, Singapore's government follows some important rules. It's all about spending funds wisely. Here's an example to help understand. Think about a big company like Temasek Holdings. It's like a huge multinational corporation with lots of employees from different countries. They have a lot of money, about $382 billion as of March 2023. But guess what? This company is owned by none other than the Singaporean government itself. Singapore's government owns many such companies in areas like transportation, energy, and media. These companies, including Temasek, invest in other businesses to make profits. Besides these investments, Singapore also collects money through high taxes on things like cars, wealth, property, and a tax called GST. Even with these taxes, Singapore usually has more money left over than it spends, which is called a fiscal surplus. On a personal level, the government also encourages people to save money through something called the Central Provident Fund. This fund takes a part of people's salaries and saves it for them. This helps Singaporeans save a lot of money, showing that both the government and citizens are good at managing money responsibly. Singapore doesn't have many natural resources, so you might ask, how do people there earn a living? When Singapore became independent, it didn't have much land to grow things or mine for resources, but they found ways to build their economy. One way was by spending a lot of money on building things like roads and factories owned by the government. They also welcomed foreign investors to bring in money. Lee Kuan Yew, the leader at that time, did both. He invested in big projects like a great port and made jobs by creating agencies like the Housing Development Board and Economic Development Board. Singapore used its location as a trading centre to attract businesses. They built a fantastic airport to make trading easier and to get more foreign money. They made it easy for businesses to set up there by making rules simpler, lowering taxes, and cutting red tape. Because of this, Singapore became one of the best places globally to do business. There was just one thing left to do: stop corruption. Lee Kuan Yew did a few things for that. He paid government workers and politicians really well so they wouldn't be tempted to take bribes. He also made strict rules with big punishments like heavy fines and jail time for anyone caught being corrupt. In the 1960s, the government enacted the Prevention of Corruption Act and established the Corrupt Practices Investigation Bureau to combat corruption independently. In 1972, Singapore initiated Tree Planting Day, leading to significant tree planting and river cleanup efforts, resulting in top-notch indoor gardens attracting tourists. Apart from that, Singapore used to focus on making textiles and refining oil. But Lee Kuan Yew wanted Singapore to be more than just a cheap place for making things. He focused on education and training by starting technical schools and internships. Companies had to pay a fee to help train workers, which improved their skills. By the 1990s, Singapore was part of global industries like biotech, aerospace, and making computer chips. Lee Kuan Yew believed in practical leadership and listening to people instead of being idolized as a hero. He emphasized responsibility and good governance, which Singapore's current Prime Minister continued after Lee's passing. While Lee limited free speech, his legacy is about effective governance and shared responsibility, not just his leadership style. We can learn from his policies while also valuing free media for accountability, which contrasts with Singapore's approach during Lee Kuan Yew's time. So, what lessons can we learn from Singapore's journey? And how can we apply them to our own lives and communities? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more insightful content on our channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.